Jonathan, thank you very much for those warm words of introduction. As Lyndon Johnson said at moments when he was introduced so warmly, I wish my parents had been here for that. My father would have appreciated it, and my mother would have believed it. And that is especially true of my Jewish mother. This is not the usual venue of an economist like myself. I am glad to be here because through the involvement of my wife, Lisa New, who is a member of the YIVO board, I have come to understand just how important the work of YIVO is in preserving the traditions of our people. It is a commitment to the preservation of tradition that has been an important reason why the Jewish tradition has continued for 3,000 years. And if, as I expect, it continues for 3,000 more years, it will be because of a commitment to the work of preserving that tradition. And so each of us, as we go about our everyday lives, should I believe, be very, very glad that institutions like YIVO exist to maintain, preserve, support, and develop our tradition. And I've also gotten to know you, Jonathan, and in a life that's gone on for some time now, I have been privileged to know many who lead nonprofit institutions with important missions that are important to their society. And I know of none who lead their institution with more commitment, more wisdom, and more deep sense of ultimate purpose than you do, Jonathan. And YIVO is very, very lucky to have you. Now, you might ask, why is somebody who usually talks about the future of the dollar or whether there will be a recession or what the impact of technology is on employment here tonight? It is because I have spent my life in universities, because I believe universities are profoundly important institutions, because they do what is ultimately most important in any society. They teach, develop, and influence people at the most malleable point in their lives between the ages of, say, 18 and 25. And because they are charged with developing the new ideas and the new doctrines that ultimately shape history. Paul Samuelson was right when he said that he would be happy to let anyone else be the finance minister of any country if he could write the economics textbooks that the students read. And Isaiah Berlin was right when he said that nations fell because of ideas developed by professors in the quiet of their study. And so what happens in universities is profoundly important, not in an hour or a day or a week or a month, but ultimately for the development of societies and for the development of the world. Henry Kissinger was wise in many things, but he was wrong when he said that the fights were so vicious because the stakes were so small. Or at least he was partially wrong, because some of the fights are very vicious over things where the stakes are very small. But sometimes the stakes are very large. And it is an aspect of what is going on in universities, their response to the challenges in the Middle East, their response to debates over the state of Israel that are of great concern to me, have been for some time, and cause me to be here tonight. My wife, last March, came back from spending 10 days as a visiting scholar at Hebrew University. She described many aspects of that experience, but there was one aspect that she described that made the greatest impact on her and had the greatest impact on me. She talked about how she prepared to give a lecture to a group of Israeli scholars, graduates and undergraduates, on various topics in American literature: Franklin, Hawthorne, Melville, Faulkner, Dickinson, and so forth. But she described to me how, while she had been introduced many, many times, as I have, for the first time, the person who introduced her had a tremble in her voice, reflecting great emotion as she introduced Lisa. That was not, I have to confess, a reflection of Lisa's personal greatness. It was a reflection of what Lisa's presence meant. For all the scholars and students in that room had been recently informed that the American Studies Association, the group that oversaw and supported professional scholars studying America, a group whose work had engaged Israeli scholars and Arab scholars, and Israeli and Arab scholars working together on a common interest of understanding America, that group had been informed that the American Studies Association, an organization of thousands of American scholars that included among its members dozens, if not hundreds, of American universities, had voted to ban scholarly exchange with scholars in Israeli universities. The American Studies Association was the largest such association, but it was not the only such association. The African Literature Association, the Association for Asian American Studies, the Association for Humanist Sociology, the Critical Ethnic Studies Association, the National Association of Chicana and Chicano Studies, the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association, the Peace and Justice Studies Association, United Auto Workers Local 285, seeking to organize the teaching fellows at Berkeley, 1,000 anthropologists making a proposal to the American Anthropological Association, all called for the boycott of Israel. I think it is outrageous. I think it is dangerous. I think it demands a much stronger response from the American academic community than it has yet received. And that is why I am here tonight. And if I had any doubt about whether I should be here tonight, if I had any doubt about whether anti-Semitism was a continuing threat, if I had any doubt about whether these were small issues, that doubt was resolved when I entered to give the lecture. I walked up to what looked to me like the door. That door was not open. Instead, I was instructed that I had to go through the visitor's entrance, and that was because YIVO had taken a precaution that I am sure was prudent to take, which was to require that we all go through a metal detector before coming into this building. Think about it. I'm used to having to go through metal detectors at airports. Having worked in the White House, I am used to going through metal detectors to go into meetings where the President of the United States is speaking. But you can go to any citadel of capitalism in this city without walking through a metal detector. You can go to almost any church in this city without walking through a metal detector. You can go to almost any mosque in this city without walking through a metal detector. And yet, prudence demands a metal detector here at YIVO. And that speaks to the continuing challenge and the continuing importance of anti-Semitism as an issue. Now, I will come back in just a moment to talk about what the response has been and what I think the response perhaps should be to the question of this boycott and other provocations like it. But first, I want to make two other observations that I think are helpful in framing the issue and in considering the response. The first is to ask the question, well, isn't there a difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? Isn't there a difference between disagreeing with Israel and being anti-Semitic? And here would be my answer. There is nothing anti-Semitic about disagreement with the policies of the state of Israel. Lisa and I certainly do not support the current settlements policies of the state of Israel, certainly do not support the policies that the state of Israel has taken with respect to U.S. domestic politics, and do not see the issues surrounding Iran in the same way that the current government of Israel does. And in my view, to suggest that that disagreement would render us anti-Semitic would be absurd. On the other hand, I believe that the State Department of the United States, which publishes a report each year on anti-Semitism, got it about right when they wrote, while criticism of Israel cannot automatically be regarded as anti-Semitic, rhetoric that applies double standards to Israel crosses the line of legitimate criticism. And I would ask you the question. I would ask you the question that those Israeli scholars asked my wife about the American Studies Association. They told her that they didn't approve of many of the policies of the government of Israel. In fact, they took her on a tour of what they regarded as the most outrageous bits of settlement expansion that could not be described as natural and organic growth. And they noted that no one in Israel tried to stop them from protesting in that way, that no one in Israel tried to stop them from speaking out against the policies of the Israeli government. And they noted that in Israel's own region of the Middle East, there were more than a dozen governments where you would pay with your life for the kind of protests they engaged in every day, and that the American Studies Association was not boycotting one of those countries. And so that is a double standard, and that kind of double standard represents anti-Semitism. Does anyone doubt for a moment, that if somehow the idea was concocted that a particular African country should be boycotted, when there was nothing about the conduct of that African country that distinguished it from a dozen other countries outside of Africa, that if that happened, it would be labeled as racist? Of course it would. And in the same way, the singling out of Israel, I would suggest, should be labeled for what it is, anti-Semitism. Now, a second question one might raise, and it's one that I have more sympathy with in at least trying to understand the different perspectives on these issues, is what about just the idea that everybody should be allowed to advocate what they want, do what they want, say what they want, and that is all in the name of academic freedom? And that while I may disapprove of it, it is itself an application of academic freedom for the American Studies Association to say we don't want to deal with Israeli scholars, so we don't have to deal with Israeli scholars. That is another question one can raise. I think in approaching that question, one place to start, though certainly not to finish, is with some understanding of prevailing norms in at least some parts of academia. Now, I'm going to tell you a story, and the story I'm going to tell you is not typical, and it does leave an exaggerated impression, but it does not leave an impression that is 100% false. The nation's largest university system is the University of California at Berkeley, University of California system. It has 9 universities and dozens of colleges. The chancellor of that system wrote a letter to all the faculty in that system, tens of thousands of faculty members, encouraging them to attend seminars where they could learn how to speak and write in ways that were appropriate, in ways that did not trigger people on their campuses. And in those seminars, there were examples given of offensive speech that would be triggering. Men and women have equal opportunities for achievement. Asserting that proposition was deemed to be triggering. Everybody can succeed in the society if they work hard enough. That was deemed to be triggering. All of humanity is one race. That was deemed to be triggering. And my favorite example, again, this came from the chancellor of the university in seminars that were being sponsored, was America is the land of opportunity. Now, this is not typical. The chancellor, no doubt, did not know exactly what was going on in these seminars. These are a few examples that a journalist picked out, and there were many other examples that were offensive. And all of us who work with young people do need to be aware of what their sensitivities and sensibilities are, and there are certainly phrases that we all would have used 20 years ago that we would not use today. But I would suggest to you that in a campus culture where it is contemplatable to suggest that saying America is a land of opportunity is somehow outrageous and wrong, that it is fair to expose to scrutiny the behavior of members of faculties who drive academic boycotts of the state of Israel. And it is fair, I would suggest, to ask of university administrations, what are they going to do to respond to this outrage? This outrage perpetrated by organizations of which they are a member. And so the question arises, what is the right way, to respond? Now, I've talked about boycotts by scholarly associations. That's not the only example. Universities with increasing frequency find themselves lending their name and their sponsorship to conferences in which the legitimacy of Israel as a state is challenged. I would suggest to you that while anyone is free to hold any opinion they wish, no member of a university community has the right to arrogate the prestige of the institution behind their personal view. And when there is the Harvard University Conference on X, that is what someone is doing. Pressure for symbolic economic sanctions mounts and occasionally succeeds. As one example, Harvard's dining service, in a decision that was apparently not reviewed at any senior level, bowed to a pressure from a small group of students to stop purchasing soda dispensers that had been manufactured in occupied parts of the West Bank. Anecdotal reports suggest that swastika graffiti, comparisons between Israel and the Nazis, and the intimidation of Jewish students have never been so great. There are other examples. Students seeking positions in student governments at UCLA and other universities have been asked whether they could make objective decisions given that they were Jewish. Proposals that the university divest any company doing business in Israel were passed by Stanford Student Government and the Student Government Association representing Princeton graduate students and many other universities as well. What's been the response of universities to these provocations? To be fair, they have rejected boycotts like those of the American Studies Association. Typical statements are something like, such boycotts threaten academic speech and exchange, which is our solemn duty as academic institutions to protect. Or, in the words of William Bowen, a former Princeton president and a revered senior academic leader, boycotts are a bad idea. It is a dangerous business and basically unwise for institutions to become embroiled in these kinds of debates. The consequences for institutions are just too serious. I do not believe this is the right response to academic boycotts of Israel, or responses in parallel are the right response to the other provocations I have described. There are two problems with this line of argument. First, it's too broad. Is it really true that always academic boycotts are inappropriate? Should American universities have cooperated fully with Nazi universities and loyal Nazi scholars in the 1930s? Would a university that indicated that while individual scholars were free to do what they pleased, it would not invite members of the Ku Klux Klan to speak in its civil rights lecture series be doing something wrong? Are not de facto boycotts a regular part of academic life? Astronomy departments boycott astrologers. Biology departments boycott creationists. Philosophy departments, almost without exception, boycott Ayn Rand disciples. The problem is not with the idea of a boycott. The problem is with the moral outrage that this boycott represents and its anti-Semitic character. Second, it misses the point. For some reason, for the same reason that those who propose to divest all assets of universities that invest in Israel are doing something that's anti-Semitic, the academic boycott of Israel and universities and scholars from no other country is also anti-Semitic in effect and quite likely in intent. It seeks to demonize only the Jewish state. It is, if you listen to the titles of all the associations I listed, it is unrelated to the expertise of any. What should university presidents have said? If I had been a university president, I would have said something like this. The decision of the American Studies Association, supported by a majority of its membership, to single out Israeli institutions and Israeli scholars for selective boycott is abhorrent. The university believes it is very dangerous for scholarly associations to insert themselves into political issues outside the range of their competence. While individual members of the faculty are free to do as they wish, the university is withdrawing its institutional membership in the American Studies Association. We will withdraw from any scholarly association that engages in similar boycotts. Such statements, which have been conspicuously missing in American academic life, would, in my view, bring moral clarity where it is currently missing. The problem is not primarily that some exchanges are not taking place. So was happy to go to Israel. It is that the American academic community is being implicated in uniquely persecuting the world's only Jewish state, whose sins that even on the least sympathetic reading are small compared to those of many other nations. In the same vein, I believe that universities should make clear that their names cannot be invoked as the purported sponsor for conferences or dialogues in which the primary thrust is the demonization of Israel. When errors happen, they should be called out clearly, and it goes without saying that they should not allow themselves to be used as economic leverage against Israel. Does any of this matter? How important is any of this? We can hope, we can expect that these are isolated outrages. And certainly it would be wrong to take away the impression that most faculty members or most universities are persons or institutions of ill will. But I would also suggest that in this era of increased awareness of the dangers of demonization of any group, that this is a dangerous and disturbing trend. It is a dangerous and disturbing trend in universities. It is a dangerous and disturbing trend when the Presbyterian Church votes to divest itself of economic assets in Israel. And that, yes, academic freedom is a very, very important thing, but that academic freedom does not include freedom from criticism, and that these outrages should be criticized much more vigorously than they have been in the past. Thank you very much.